Not that long ago, Bungie introduced an entirely new weapon type to us, our very first ever rocket-assisted pulse rifle. And since then, our dear old Mint Retrograde has been pretty much utilized in almost all facets of the game, from ad clear to major and champion buster to outright DPS. Mint has solidified itself in the meta and has earned a permanent place in many of my own builds. However, with Ash and Iron, a new competitor enters the fray, that being new Malpais. This is essentially an exotic version of Mint, but it goes way beyond that. It's got a very interesting gameplay loop. It does a tremendous amount of damage, it's an exotic, and it's got an absolutely deadly exotic catalyst. Today, guys, we're going to be reviewing new Malpais, and we're going to be comparing it directly to Mint Retrograde. Now first, how do you even acquire this new exotic? Well, this is actually just right there on your reward pass, and it's instantly unlocked for anyone who paid for the season pass. But it can also be unlocked for free when you rank up to level 70 in the pass. Now beyond that, at rank 90 is where you unlock the catalyst. Yes, it's a juicy one. Exotic catalysts can vary from just being a stat bump. Sometimes they do lean into the weapon and its synergy, and I would say this exotic catalyst definitely does just that. We'll be breaking that down later in the video. But first, let's go over the base perks found on this weapon. It comes with hammer-forged rifling, tactical mag, along with a fitted stock. Now the exotic perk is called atomizing rounds. Rounds fired embed themselves in targets. Press reload to detonate embedded rounds. Here you can see it in action. When you shoot the weapon, whether that's at a target or even on the ground, you can see the 3 rockets will leave behind a small green explosive that is surrounded by a strand aura. Now these will last for about 6 seconds, but they don't explode all at once if you wait at the timer. They'll essentially explode in sequence from first to last shots. Additionally, these do not explode based on proximity. So unlike something like Wildcard, you need to either let them explode naturally or proccing its exotic perk, as in they will not explode if an enemy walks on top of them. Now with the exotic perk, you simply hold your reload button for that alt reload animation, which will explode these explosives at your discretion. Now the majority of the damage this weapon deals comes from these detonations, and what's great is that it allows this weapon to be used to deal damage from behind cover or during damage rotations. Now the other trait that ties directly into these explosions is the trait Suspending Blast. Detonating a large number of rounds embedded in a single target suspends them. Now this is an amazing perk. Literally turns this weapon into an explosive suspending machine. In our testing here at the shooting range, we were getting a suspension after detonating 6 explosives on this barrier champion, but this had to be a detonation via our alt reload. You can't let the explosives detonate themselves, as for some reason that wouldn't proc it. Now we also tried lowering the amount of explosives on the target to see if we could get this to spin, but it does seem like we're hard stuck here at 6 rocket detonations for that suspend. So essentially 2 bursts. Now I do want to mention that these explosives need to be embedded into a target for the suspend to happen. You can't spam a bunch of shots on the ground in an area and get a suspend like it's Wishkeeper. Now I know it says right there in the perk description that it works off of embedded rounds, but you know how things can be sometimes, guys. We double checked it. For us, you actually have to make full contact with the target that you're trying to suspend. Now we did just mention a champion, and the interesting thing about new Malpais is that it does not have an intrinsic anti-champion symbol in its weapon tray. This means that we can slot in anti-barrier pulse from the artifact to deal with barrier champions while also still being able to stun unstoppable champions with the Suspending Blast perk. So nice 2-in-1. Another cool thing about using this as anti-barrier is that you can shoot the champion, which embeds the explosives. And if they activate their shield, you can then alt reload to detonate the explosives, which will pretty much instantly break the shield. But this takes us to our exotic catalyst. This catalyst really does pick it up for this weapon. And yes, we did swipe the card here in order to test this out for you. Ain't no way I was gonna get rank 90 in a day and a half before Borderlands. Now I'm not gonna say this is worth it. Grind at your own pace. But this grants new Malpais here the perk Unraveling Blast. Now this states that this weapon's explosions unravel nearby targets. Now if you're familiar with how Unravel works, this is a strand debuff that can be applied to enemies, which will create this green aura on them, and when they take damage again, it will then release 3 seeking strand projectiles that will seek out other enemies or continuously damage the target that you unraveled. The great thing about Unravel though is that every time the projectile damages the unraveled target, it will refresh the unravel timer, which leads to some very nice damage over time. You can see here on Carl that we have 2 projectiles that deal 47 damage and a single tick of 57, which is a total of 151, and it will proc every 1.2 seconds. Now for this catalyst specifically, much like how suspending works on this weapon, these do need to be direct explosions for the unravel to proc. You can't deal AoE damage to the target via the explosion to proc this debuff. What you can do though is let the explosives detonate naturally on the targets, which will proc that Unravel debuff. Now, before we get too carried away here with how we can be using this weapon to the best of its ability, we need to break down damage numbers. Now, when we compare this to Mint, we need to first identify what makes Mint Retrograde so good. It's a legendary, it does a tremendous amount of damage, it has access to temporal mods because it is a legendary weapon, so you can use things like temporal blasts or temporal armaments, which we're going to talk about in a little more detail, but it also has access to good damage perks, whether it's elemental honing or bait and switch. But the thing that really makes Mint so good is the perk in its third column, Rewind Rounds. Rewind Rounds literally allows you to blow your load with Mint and never stop, providing fantastic DPS. Now, we do a lot of testing here at the shooting range, but I wanted to take this into Templar and see how these two weapons compare against each other, which one in this same time frame does the most damage. Now, we're operating here with 100 weapon stats. Base Mint does 11,208 damage here on Templar. Now, when we added in Temporal Blast with no damage perk, this increased our damage to 12,232. Now, Temporal Armaments is actually a bit better now, as it further increased our damage up to 13,346. And again, that's at 17% more damage for the enhanced version of this mod against Cabal enemies and Vex enemies. Now, what if we tacked on Elemental Honing times 5? Well, this kicked up our damage to 14,958. With Temporal Blast, that goes up to 16,525. And then with Temporal Armaments, that jumped up to 17,279. Now, this is not us sitting there comparing Temporal Blast to Temporal Armaments. That's for a future video. But this takes us to new Malpais. Now, because this weapon has an alt fire to detonate our explosives, we wanted to figure out what would be the best time to proc these explosives to ensure the highest damage. What ended up being the best way to deal damage was to actually dump your mag and then just hit the alt reload at the end of the damage phase right before the Templar teleports. Again, this depends on the boss or encounter that you're actually taking on. You do lose out on the suspend damage in this case, but you would also lose out on damage if you stopped in the middle of shooting to activate those detonations. And considering that the explosives can detonate by themselves, you're still able to cause some great damage via the extra explosives while still blowing your load. Now, this ended up providing us a damage value of 13,425. Now, that does put it above base Mint, and even above base Mint with Temporal Blasts and Temporal Armaments, but Mint with the damage perk, even if we weren't taking into account Elemental Honing, maybe bait and switch, still outperforms new Malpais. Now, it's not to say this new exotic isn't good, and believe me, there's a place for this new exotic, and I also think in the long term, maybe new Malpais will outpace Mint once temporal mods are gone. What Mint also possesses, though, is its ability to synergize with some of our newest artifact mods that new Malpais can't. Most notably, the micro missile artifact mods. You see, Malpais is not coded as micro missiles, these shots here. If you look at the newest artifact mod, Energy Acceleration, it says that sustained damage with micro missiles causes the combatant to emit a kinetic shockwave that damages nearby combatants. Now, what this essentially does, it allows micro missile weapons to have its own version of kinetic tremors. Now, it's only one shockwave, similar to our Tech Sec armor set 4-piece bonus, but it does tack on a bit of damage. New Malpais doesn't work with this artifact mod, whereas Mint, like our other rocket assisted sidearms, is able to take advantage of this mod. Now, keep in mind, new Malpais can still synergize with all of our other Strand artifact mods, but so can Mint. But this led us to test things even further. If the new micro missile artifact mod doesn't work with new Malpais, what about Hazardous Propulsion? This is our Titan exotic that buffs our rocket damage, and it even goes further because it can buff our rocket assisted frames. Unfortunately, new Malpais is not working, or in this case, not getting the buff from Hazardous Propulsion. Yes, it can get stacks, but so can everything else. But as far as the buff goes, this does not apply to new Malpais. And I'm just under the assumption that because it's coded differently and it has that alt detonation mode, that in game, it's not really considered a rocket, despite it being a rocket assisted weapon. Now, is that to say that this exotic is a wash? Absolutely not, guys. Where this weapon really shines is in its super regeneration capabilities. Testing here back on Carl at 71 super stats, we're able to get our super back in 2 magazines of ammo. Just look at the regeneration here when proccing the detonations themselves. Essentially, I'm able to get my super back every 15 seconds. Now, of course, it depends on the super that you're using, right? One-off supers, for instance, when we jumped on Warlock with Needle Storm, those gains are considerably less, but still good gains. And when we compare this directly to Outbreak, you can see that Outbreak still provides great super regeneration, and it's a great option considering it's a primary, but it takes us 21 seconds to get our super back when landing all crits. But you're not getting as much of a chunk as you would with new Malpais. Honestly, new Malpais is so good in the super regeneration departments, and considering how much damage it does, because you have so many different things contributing here. The 3 shots, the detonations, the Unravel. I really wouldn't be surprised if Bungie clamps down on this thing before the Epic Raid. I hope they don't, but considering everything they just recently nerfed, I wouldn't be surprised. So where new Malpais sits when it's fully loaded out and you got your exotic catalyst is that it has some of the best synergy in the game when it comes to strand builds. For warlocks with swarmers, for hunters with foe tracer, for titans, and not hazardous propulsion because it doesn't work. I don't know, use something else. The point is, this exotic has a list of synergies from our artifact mods to our different exotics in the game. It is a major and champion buster, and its super regeneration is fantastic. So much so that I could see people using this in the day one epic raid. Yes, in a one-to-one comparison, it does fall behind Mint, but it's those other things that makes it stand out. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.